Blog Talk Radio.
Are you ready to take a bite out of the competition? Are you looking for ideas to make your business better? Welcome to the Core Business Show with Tim Jacquet, sponsored by Apple Capital Group. At the core of every successful business, you'll find people making a difference. And with each episode of the Core Business Show, we talk with those people, examine those ideas, and explore the strategies that make them special. Now, the host of the Core Business Show, Tim Jacquet.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Core Business Show. I'm Tim Jacquet, your host. Today, we're going to talk about the GSA Schedule. What is the GSA Schedule and what it really is about? We'll be back in a moment. We're going to take a commercial break, and we'll go ahead and start the show. You're listening to the Core Business Show. I'm Tim Jacquet.
You're listening to the Core Business Show, sponsored by Apple Capital Group. Apple Capital Group in Jacksonville, Florida, is a commercial lender that specializes in asset-based loans, equipment leasing and financing, invoice financing, commercial real estate loans, and asset-based financing in the U.S. and Canada. Apple Capital Group is a direct lender that lends on their private equity investment portfolio. 90% of most loans are decided within 2 hours, and vendor funding within 24 hours after documents are completed, with a one-page application. No slow no's, just a quick decision and a fast yes. To get more information about lending from Apple Capital Group, call 866-611-7457. That's 866-611-7457 to speak with one of our loan specialists. Or visit us right now at applecapitalgroup.com. Welcome back to the Core. Once again, here's Tim Jacquet.
Welcome back. The GSA Schedule is by definition, is an independent agency of the United States government established in 1949 to help manage and support the basic functioning of a government agency. GSA supplies products and communication for U.S. government offices, provides transportation, office space to federal employees, and develop government-wide cost minimizing policies and manage other tasks. Pretty much, GSA is a buyer, as a preliminary buyer of the United States. This agency actually does all the solicitation and buying of the federal government. Agencies actually contract GSA to go do those things. So you can't go things on the open bid, the federal bid laws, but GSA is a prime contractor. They only do with people who actually went through their screening process, who they think is deserving to be a instant buyer who is credible. And basically, if you have a GSA contract, some people would tell you, you have it made as long as you sell things. You have to sell at least $25,000 in a 2-year period. If not, you can lose that contract. But there's a formal agreement that you already made with your prices. And any agency within that government who wants to use GSA can pick up the phone and buy whatever because the price has already been negotiated. And the payment is pretty quick as well. So they're authorized to pay whatever that dollar amount is on that particular contract for that particular item. Is already approved and negotiated. So again, this is a series of shows that we recorded some time ago, and I thought, hey, let's go ahead and use this for the show topic for the next couple of weeks in dealing with the government. So again, this is first, we're going to talk about understanding the GSA.
One point regarding what you put up on GSA Advantage, you can put a lot of marketing stuff around your price list so that as they go through and they're looking for, it takes you one time to do that, and get your price list looking really good. And then when the contracting officer is going looking for those other two guys, when they've decided they want to make a buy, if they come across a really great looking price list, on there, that could influence them to select you to be one of those three, and then you get a chance to be in that competition. And it's not a big thing to do. Normally you would take your normal marketing materials anyway, and you position them around your price list. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. GSA furnishes you some software to do that, and it's very difficult to use. It's really very difficult to use. So there's people out and available in the marketplace that'll do that for you at a very reasonable price. We deal with one guy that I think he charges $300 or something to pretty up your price list and do it exactly the way it's going to knock somebody's eyes out when it comes up. So the advantage to the customers we already talked about. You've already been evaluated, so they don't have to go through the evaluation process. They can issue an order and they can expect that you're going to perform it. See, when GSA puts you on a schedule, they're saying to all of their customers within the government, I've looked at this guy, I've assessed his financial capability, I've looked at what he's done in the past, and he can do the things that he says he can do under this contract. They dearly do not want somebody from the Navy, for instance, to come back and say, wait a minute, I went to your GSA Schedule contractor, and he totally screwed up the whole thing. He couldn't do the work, he didn't have the people, but he went bankrupt 6 months into the program. So they're very careful to go through and look at the capabilities that you're presenting to make sure that they don't get embarrassed when you go under. And their internal government customer comes back and says, hey, you really screwed me up on this. Everything's been negotiated. The advantage is, again, 15 days versus 268 days. They don't have to worry about the competition. When you put out an RFP, anybody can get a copy of that. So the government may say, well, I've got 3 or 4 people out here that I think I'd like to deal with in response to this RFP. They may get 30 or 40 bids. Well, now you have to deal with those bids. In an RFP situation, you have to evaluate them. You can't discard them willy-nilly. You have to evaluate them. You have to come down to the acceptable bidders. And that's why you get up to that 268 days. This sidesteps all of that. You don't need to go through that process. You can put out a solicitation to 3 bidders, 3 people that have GSA schedules. So we talked yesterday about the fact that these orders are by definition competitive. Key area. There's a distinction made between GWACs and the schedules. Under GWACs, the buying activity has to pay a fee to the agency that owns the GWAC. Now, under a GSA schedule, the contractor has to pay what's called an industrial funding fee back to GSA. And that funding fee used to be 1%. They took in too much money, and so they reduced it now to 0.75%. Now, that's a difference without distinction, because when you put your prices into GSA, you add that industrial funding fee to your price. So the agency that buys your services or your products is paying that fee. They just don't realize it because it's buried in the price. And so it makes it more acceptable, apparently. Also, very often, you'll get a customer that'll come to you and say, look, the prices in your schedule are based on somebody buying a quantity of 1. Well, I want to buy a quantity of 1,000. So I think I should get a better price. And oh, by the way, I'm going to be buying those quantities of 1,000 over the next 2 years. And so I'd like to have a better price based on that. Well, you can enter into what's called a BPA, blanket purchase agreement. And you can give them a better price based on that projection. Now, there's no guarantee they're going to buy that 1,000. So you're taking a risk by giving them that better price based on this anticipated quantity. But there's no guarantee they're going to buy that. And what happens is, if they don't buy it, they may get close and so on. But if it never materializes, the next time they come to you and say, gee, I'm going to buy 1,000 over a couple of years, you say, I've heard that before. Maybe you don't give them the same discount the next time. So it's a learning process, again. And you're not going to find that many times when they're not going to buy the quantities that they had anticipated, because generally these are based on budget projections and so on. And you can even, in verifying how good you think their projections are, go into the budget of that particular agency and to see what's projected and satisfy yourself that it's going to happen. I used to deal with the Teletype Corporation years ago, before the days of personal computers and everything. And everybody in the service was buying teletypes. Well, the Teletype Corporation was essentially a sole source. They had the finest teletype machines in the world. And so they would come to the Navy. I was working for the Navy at the time. And they would say, okay, we're setting up our schedule for next year, our production schedule. How many would you like? How many do you anticipate you're going to be needing? Well, at that point, Navy couldn't make a contractual commitment because we didn't have the funds yet for that year. But we would project, and we'd say, okay, we're going to need 150-year teletypes. Fine. That would go into the projections that Teletype Corporation would use to start their production. And so they'd come in with their we would then go out the following year with a solicitation to Teletype Corporation, say, give us a quote for 150 of these. And so you'd get a quote back, and we would then prepare a contract and shoot the contract out. Every time that we did that, Teletype would come back with exceptions to the contract. They would always take exceptions. So after about the third year of that, I sat down and I went through every possible prior exception that they had taken. And I wrote that contract taking into account every one of those prior exceptions. Came back with an exception. They took exception to the authority that we had cited on the contract page, the authority to negotiate rather than have formal advertising. And they said, we have no way of knowing whether or not you did that correctly. I called the representative and I said, if you ever want this contract, if you ever want this contract, get that letter out of there. We are not going to assess whether or not you know whether or not we did our internal job correctly. That's why I say, you have no way of knowing. You have no way of knowing whether or not the buyer broke that stuff up illegally. You have to assume that the buyer did his job correctly. The buyer is following the regulations. So instantly, that I gave him 3 hours. Get a letter in here that says you're not taking any exception. It was fun being a buyer, I have to tell you. We used to put out solicitations. And I was a young kid. I was just out of the Marine Corps. And so we would put out a solicitation. We'd have an opening date the Monday after Thanksgiving. And so the first call would come in. Oh, it's a Monday after Thanksgiving. We got to work through the holiday, and we got to take people. I said, well, wait, nobody else is calling. I don't know what the problem is. And we always changed it. It was always changed, and we would, put it out where they didn't have a problem. But you have to have a little fun in those jobs, right? But I say I was a young kid. I probably wouldn't do that today. The services you can provide, they kind of cover the gambit of everything that's out there regarding professional services. Now, in Mary Sue's case, she's going to be responding to a schedule that is issued by the Veterans Administration because she's in the medical field, and GSA has delegated the responsibility for the schedules in the medical field to the VA. It still looks like and sounds like and operates like a GSA schedule, but it's a schedule issued by the Veterans Administration. Products, you can drive a truck through all these things. You can buy anything on these schedules. Have a guy who has a proposal in to provide furniture for dormitories or squad bays, as they used to be called. He had a problem in that he had never charged his services separate from the furniture that he was providing. If there's any design services and so on, he just rolled that into the price of the job that he was doing. And so now he's trying to sell services separate from the furniture. But we had a heck of a time getting to an agreement with the GSA as to how we were going to support that he had sold those services in the commercial marketplace, because he'd sold them to colleges and universities and so on as part of this big package. So we finally got them to agree that we could impute the amount that he charged. He had invoices that said I've delivered a certain amount of furniture and I had provided services as part of that package. But nowhere was there any indication of what the price was for those services. So they allowed us to go back and create what the price would have been had he been required to bill it that way, because he obviously was providing the services and he had them packed up in this fixed price. And so they've allowed us to do that. It was an interesting negotiation. When I do a schedule for somebody, I have them put me in the response as the authorized negotiator. So when the calls come, the contracting officer is going to call me rather than the bidder. And then I coordinate with the bidder and we get a response back. The key things about these schedules, they're based on commercial price lists. They're based on commercial prices. You have to have established that you've sold these items to the general public at the prices that you're presenting. One of the things you have to do when you're responding to these schedules is you have to disclose how you discount. And there's a form in the solicitation, and we'll have a few more words about that too. You have to disclose how you discount. I had one company came to me after the fact. They were a company located in Florida. They had a security product that they had developed in a garage down in Florida, dealing with fingerprints and so on. And they had gotten a GSA schedule, an 84 schedule. All these schedules have numbers. And that schedule was security equipment. Well, they had a couple of problems. Number one, that schedule was only usable by the federal government. And they wanted to be able to go out to state and local sheriff's departments, police departments, and so on and sell these products. And having a schedule that will allow them to do that would have been a great advantage. They also, since they had started out a couple of years before, they had started to get some good press. And so they had prime contractors wanting to come and buy their stuff and then resell it. And they had a problem because in the 84 schedule, they hadn't disclosed any discounting practices because they didn't have any at the time they got the schedule. They were a small little company. So they couldn't respond to these requirements for reselling because they would have had to then reduce their price in the GSA schedule to reflect that. But I had a solution for them. Okay, what we'll do is, because this device operates with a computer, which you sell with the device, we'll get you on an IT70 schedule, which is for computer equipment, and the fingerprint stuff will become an IO device to that computer. So we submitted the proposal that way, and when we submitted that proposal, we submitted it with all the discounting schedules that they were going to use, all the resellers and anybody else that whether it be a nonprofit organization or all the people that might get a discount, we put that in there. The key behind that was that you can't have the same product on more than one schedule. So, and each schedule has a provision that the schedule holder, as well as the government, can cancel within 30 days. So we notified the government that we were going to cancel the original schedule, the 84 schedule, on the day that the IT70 schedule got signed. And they said, fine. So we got them out of that problem. And now anybody in the country, any government location, any government level in the country can buy off that IT70 schedule. That's the only schedule that's usable by any government entity within the country, right down to the school boards.
You're listening to the Core Business Show, sponsored by Apple Capital Group.
So there are ways of working the system, but if you attempt to discount to somebody differently than you disclose to the government, you're going to have a problem, because you're going to have to go back and tell GSA that you did that, and you're going to have to change the price in your GSA schedule. One of the interesting points in the schedule is this maximum order limitation. In most schedules, that's going to be about $500,000, which says that if the government were to issue you an order for more than $500,000, you don't have to accept it, but you can accept it if you want to. Okay, and there's two things that revolve around that, two key items. The government, if they're going to issue you one more than $500,000, are undoubtedly going to come and ask you for a better price. Undoubtedly. The regulations encourage that, encourage a buyer to say, if we're going to go over the maximum order limitation, get a better price. No problem. I mean, you can say yes or no, because you do not have to accept that order. So you can decide, yeah, I'll give you a better price and I'll accept the order. Another key thing about that is that if you get a commercial order over that maximum order limitation at a better price than you had disclosed in the disclosure when you made the proposal, that does not trigger the price reduction clause, because that's a big enough order in the government's mind that they should not hold you to those prior restrictions. So if you get an order for $1 million and it's fixed price and so on, then there's no price reduction exercised by the contract if you've given a better discount on that $1 million order. They recognize that you're in the commercial marketplace and you're going to get some big orders, and that they are trying to buy ones and twos. So they recognize that, what the realities of business are. Again, we talk about the three companies. When you're over $100,000 under full and open competition, whether it be an IFB or an RFP, those have to be posted. We used to use the term, they have to be synopsized, but that's the Fed BizOps has taken the place of the old, what they used to call it, the Commerce Business Daily. Yeah, Commerce Business Daily was the Bible. Everybody had that on their desk, checked it every day, and so on. That's been replaced now by Fed BizOps, and it's available online, and it's updated daily. So every procurement that's going to go out on full and open competition is synopsized on Fed BizOps, and it gives you all the necessary data that you need to contact the agency. It gives you the names, the telephone numbers, and so on of who to contact in the agency regarding that procurement. We talked about some of the registrations that you have to go through, and we talked about the prices that are going to be in your schedule are going to be based on your commercial price lists. Now, these do not have to be a price list that's published and printed and distributed around the world, but they have to be established, and they have to be in a form that can be a data file. They have to be in a form that you refer to when someone comes in to get a quote from you, that you go to that file and you get the price that you're going to quote to them. And the government's going to come in, and one of the audits is going to be, where's your commercial price list? One of the key items is the sales marketing organization. We talked yesterday, but your organization has to be able to perform. They're having a GSA schedule. And the key item there is that if you have marketing folks who are out making quotes to customers They have to know what the requirements are in your contract. They have to know that you have an established price list. They have to know that you have a set of prices that have been disclosed that are in your GSA schedule. And they can't go out willy-nilly and make discounts to the customer, because if they do that, and then, of course, the auditor comes in and finds that you've charged XYZ company down the road a price cheaper than the government price, and it was less than $500,000, less than the maximum order limit, they're going to exercise the price reduction clause. And all your prices are going to be reduced down to that price for that item. And they're going to ding you. The sales tracking, these people that are out there selling, that has to be a central database at some point in your business, because you've got to pay the industrial funding fee based on those sales. So you have to have a database that will withstand audit when the guy comes in to check it. So there has to be a central database that shows that what your sales are. Contract administration, there's basic items of contract administration. You have to keep a contract file. You have to keep all the amendments with that contract, have to be up to date. All of the orders that come in have to be kept separate from each other so they're individually auditable. So you have to set up a filing system that will accommodate that. On a very small company, that's a filing cabinet drawer, and you just set up the separate files. As you get more business, you get a little larger, you're probably going to want a software-based filing system to keep track of this stuff. Physically, you got to still file them, but you want to have another database that allows you to get to them quickly. When you're going to get ready to submit your proposal, all you do is go to GSA in the solicitations website and download the solicitation you want. Now, it's going to come down, as a pretty good sized document. It comes down, 150, 200 pages. Some of them are up to 1,000 pages, but they have a lot of items listed in. And the instructions, you have to follow the instructions quite precisely to submit your proposal. And you have to read the instructions that are in a solicitation carefully to make sure that you've submitted. Some say submit your proposal in one binder and with the following sections, and some others will say submit it in three binders with the following sections. They have page limitations for each of the sections, and so you just have to pull out those detailed instructions and make sure that whoever is putting the proposal together reads those instructions and follow those instructions, and then you do a final audit before it goes in to make sure that it has followed all of the guidelines. If you haven't followed the instructions, they may just reject you. Now, if it's a minor thing, they may call you and say, hey, you didn't do so-and-so. Fix that for me. But if it's a major thing, they say, hey, your proposal is rejected. Also, you can submit these proposals electronically. You can submit them either via email or you can put them on a disk and submit them. I prefer to use the disk because I have to submit the signature page anyway. So why not submit the disk with that signature page? I guess I'm of a different generation. I'm not so much. I want all that stuff out there on the internet. That I don't know how secure that is. So anyway, I submit it with a disk and a signed cover page. But you can certainly do it with the web. Here's the web page you go to, and it's in your manual. So it gives the web location up there. And here's if we could page this down, you'd see it would go all the way down to all of the solicitations that GSA has. The first one here is Financial Business Solutions, FABS. And in order to get the solicitation, it gives you a lot of information. It tells you the contracting officer that's responsible for that solicitation. So if you go through the solicitation and you have questions, email that person. And they're very responsive. They come right back to you with responses. Give you a phone number and the email address. And you click on here and down comes the schedule. It takes a few minutes to download normally because they're pretty big, but it's an easy thing to get, and it comes down in such a manner that you can enter data right on the screen. So when you do a GSA schedule for products, you have to have an established price list for those products. Product list. You have to establish what your delivery schedule is going to be, and then if you don't deliver on that schedule, you're going to get dinged. If you're not a manufacturer, but you're selling a product from a distributor or from the manufacturer, you must have a letter of commitment or letter of supply from that manufacturer. Again, the government has a requirement to tell its customers that when you place an order for 10 of this product, he's got access to those products and he can deliver those 10 items. Basis for that is the letter of supply, that the manufacturer has committed that he will honor your orders that you're going to get out of the schedule. In many of these items, the government's going to want a maintenance plan. If you're selling printers, printing equipment, the government's going to want some indication that you have an arrangement set up nationwide to maintain that stuff when a maintenance order comes in or a warranty provision occurs. So there's maintenance organizations out there that you can contact to do this, and you just make an arrangement with them, and you have a pricing arrangement and so on, and that's priced into your product. But they're going to want to see that. The government's going to want to see that. They want to see who is the company that's going to do the maintenance. Where are they located? What are their phone numbers? What kind of response do they have? That's all got to be in your maintenance plan. If you're a manufacturer and you deal with dealers or resellers, you need to spell that out. They need to know what functions these people are going to provide. Many cases, a reseller or a dealer may provide some of the maintenance or repair function. So you need to have that. You need to have that spelled out if you're a manufacturer. With services, you have to have at least 3 previous projects described that are the same type of projects that you would anticipate getting under the schedule. And those descriptions, I have to include the name of the project, the contract that it was under, whether it was a government contract or it was a commercial project, the name of the technical contact within that organization who can comment on your performance, the name of the contracting officer, the buyer contracting officer, the period that the project occurred, period of performance. And the reason for all that is they're going to go to those people, as they did in that one case I told you about. They went to one of those guys, and he said, I don't know who you're talking about. I've never done any business with them. On the customer references, you don't actually have to have 20. You have to have at least 6, though. And the more you have, if you had only 6 and you had one bad one in there, well, your score is going to be skewed by that one bad one because you only had 6 to base it on. If you had 18 or 20 and you had one bad one, you're still going to have a score up in the high 90s. The references have to reflect each of the line item numbers that you're bidding. They call them SINs, special item numbers. If you're responding to 3 SINs, you have to have then 9 references. Now, in many cases, a single reference can apply to both because in many cases the requirements of the services and those SINs are going to overlap. And so you could have one reference that would apply to more than one special item number. But you must have 3 references for each special item number. That's saying they can overlap. Under the services, you have to have established labor categories. And you have to have a description of those labor categories. You have to show what the education requirements are in order to be a senior engineer, for instance. You have to describe what a senior engineer, in your estimation, does, what kind of duties they perform, what kind of educational requirements they had in order to get that designation, how many years of experience do they have in order to get that designation. And the reason for that is that when a buyer comes to look at that list and they look at senior engineer and you're charging $100 an hour, somebody else has a senior engineer and they're charging $80 an hour. They want to be able to compare the educational requirements, the experience requirements, and so on, to be able to determine whether or not it's worthwhile going and paying the $100 an hour. So they use it for comparison purposes. They also use it when they're reviewing your proposal. If you're charging $100 an hour and everybody else is charging $80, they come back and say, wait a minute, same education requirements, same experience requirements, doing the same things. Why are you charging $100 an hour? I mean, I had somebody go in and he was paying a subject matter expert. I mean, these guys are PhDs with 30 years experience and so on. They were charging $450 an hour. And the contracting officer, was saying, wait a minute, $450 an hour, that's crazy. Hey, here's the invoices show that the people are paying that. And in a case like that, the subject matter expert on a particular project is not going to be working on that project every day. He's going to set the stage to start. He's going to do some monitoring halfway through, and then he's going to do check the final report. So, yeah, he's going to pay him $450 an hour, but he may only charge 10 hours to a project. And we were successful in the negotiation because, wait a minute, the customers are paying this in the commercial marketplace. So the marketplace set that rate. There's going to be a narrative about the company. In that narrative, you're going to try to show what it is you do, why you're good at what you do, how long you've been in business, what kind of specialties you've acquired, who your customer set is. If you're dealing with colleges and universities, you want to put that in there as part of your customer set. And you want to put in some words about how you manage your people. There's a very specific in the IT services, a very specific set of criteria that you have to address in your proposal. There's normally a page limitation on that, incidentally. You can't use, I think, more than 3 pages in that section. So you're not going to write a book. Again, your schedule prices are going to be based on your commercial prices. You're going to add this industrial funding fee to your prices. Make sure, because one of the questions they're going to ask is, does this include the industrial funding fee? We already talked about the maximum order limitation, and that's going to vary by schedule. To most schedules, it's going to be $500,000. And we talked about why that's important.
Thank you for listening to the Core Business Show with Tim Jacquet. For a free quote on equipment leasing and financing, visit our website, applecapitalgroup.com. That's applecapitalgroup.com. And fill out the information to receive your free quote. We hope you'll join us for our next episode. And remember, you can always get to the core via iTunes. You'll find all our previous episodes there. Thanks again for listening to the Core Business Show with Tim Jacquet.